We'll be continuing our study on exposing heresy. We're going to continue our look at the heresy of falling from grace, specifically the false belief that the Israelites who perished in the wilderness had lost their salvation. Looking at Hebrews chapter 3, beginning at verse 9. When your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works for 40 years, wherefore I was grieved with that generation, and said, they do always err in their hearts, and they have not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Jumping ahead to Hebrews chapter 4, verse 1. Let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached, as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. That the Israelites fell in the wilderness is clearly taught in the Bible. Some were convicted of the grossest sins, and thousands of them were put to death for their crimes. Others were severely punished and died natural deaths in the wilderness, not being permitted to enter into the promised land. The idea that this teaches the doctrine of falling from grace is based on at least two errors. One is that the promised land represented heaven, and that those who failed to reach it failed to reach heaven. If that were true, then Moses himself failed to reach heaven, because he was not permitted to go into the promised land. He died on the mountain and was buried there. We read this in Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 5 and 6. But we know he was saved in heaven, because we see him later on the Mount of Transfiguration talking with Jesus and Elijah. We read this in Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 5. Besides this, when the Israelites reached the promised land, they had to fight to get possession of it. We see this in Joshua 6, verses 1 through 25. Surely we shall not have to fight to drive the enemy out of heaven. Evidently, the promised land did not represent heaven. Another error is in supposing that the Israelites who fell into such terrible wickedness in the wilderness had ever been saved. In the lesson, Hebrews chapter 3 and 10, we read, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. Then in Hebrews 4 and 2, we read, the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. Evidently none who fell into such gross sins had ever been saved. Proofs concerning this? Well, had those who fell in the wilderness ever known God's way? We read in Hebrews 3 and 10, wherefore I was grieved with that generation, and said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. Did those who fell in the wilderness ever believe the gospel? We'll look first at Hebrews 4 and 2. For unto us was the gospel preached, as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. Then we'll look at Hebrews chapter 3, beginning at verse 17. But with whom was he grieved for 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? And to whom sware he that they should not enter into his rest? But to them that believe not? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. What strong assurance have we that God will keep all who are his? Hebrews chapter 6, beginning at verse 17. Wherein God, willing more abundantly to shew unto the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, that by two immutable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we might have a strong consolation, who have fled for a refuge to lay hold upon the hope set before us. Is our hope sure and steadfast? Hebrews 6:19. Which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, and which entereth into that within the veil. With what is a Christian sealed? Ephesians 4:30 tells us, and grieve not the Holy Spirit of God, whereby ye are sealed unto the day of redemption. In conclusion, losing salvation is not taught in the Old Testament. David never asked for his salvation to be returned to him. He asked that the joy of his salvation be returned to him. And notice he never even mentioned a fear of losing this salvation, even after adultery and murder. Those that died during the 40-year journey through the wilderness never lost their salvation because they never had it to begin with. Our salvation is derived from the faith that the Messiah came and paid the price for our sin. Their salvation was from the faith of knowing the Messiah would come one day and pay that price. These people simply lacked that faith.